Hello and welcome to the Wealthy Wellbeing Podcast, where we talk about all things health, fitness, real estate, and entrepreneurship. My name is Zach Bush, and I am your host. And today I have a special guest, friend of mine, Shane Evans. Shane, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to see you go through the generations of the show so far.
Yeah, it evolves a little bit, right? It was just me for a little while, and I'm not like some people where I can just kind of have this long little constant train of thought explaining things. And I got to the point where I got tired of listening to myself talk. So I was like, there's other people that are probably listening who have been listening to all the episodes, probably like, okay, I need to hear something else. And I just wanted something a little more fun. I wanted to interact with people and get different perspective on things, right? I have my perspective, I have my opinions, how I've done things, how I see things, but to have other people come on and give their life experiences and how they look at things might resonate with somebody else rather than just me. So that's kind of the evolution of it. And I have way more fun sitting here for 45 minutes to an hour talking to some people that I know really well or some people that I'm still getting to learn a little bit about. So it's definitely, it's fun to see it even myself, because it's like I never would have thought this is something that I would do, because I'm not the like, hey, look at who I am, look at what I'm doing, look, this is what I'm like. So I just look at it as like, how can I help people? And getting different perspectives is kind of what this whole podcast is for.
I love that. Yeah, it means a lot to know that what you're doing is helping someone else in a way that you didn't expect that you could offer.
Yeah. And, it's, you go through this, and this is going to be like episode 10, 11, or 12, something like that. And, there's people that are listening, I'm sure, at least based on the views, that I don't know about. So it's like, sometimes it's like, am I doing the right thing? Is this, worth my time? I have fun doing it. So yeah, that's worth it in that aspect. But there's someone down the line is going to hear it and maybe get something out of it. And they might not ever tell me, and that's totally cool too. But, if you get any value from it, definitely let me know, because it would make me feel good.
Absolutely.
So enough about me in this podcast. Let's give everybody a little background on who you are and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I have been, I guess, technically in real estate and in I guess, well, mainly real estate since 2016. I was a teacher for about 13 years or so. Everything from shop class to engineering and design to HVAC, welding, and digital media. Anything that was fun in school, essentially. And so I taught a lot of classes. I learned a lot about selling the class, so selling myself, right? Because that's what I was doing all day long, and it was always electives, right? So I kind of had that mentality behind it. I was like, all right, I gotta get these kids convinced that they should be here, otherwise they're gonna go somewhere else, and my job might not be here. But it was always easy, right, to do that. So I did that for years, and finally realized that it was time to kind of switch gears. I've been investing since 2016. We have a multifamily in New Jersey that my wife and I house hacked kind of thing, and we converted to a new unit, and now it's a 3-unit property down there, and we still have it. We love it. It's a great income generator, and right now I'm working on. So I transitioned from wholesaling through to the Growth Co. I went through that program with Jesse Stanton, his mentor program, and then I, from there it kind of just tilted upward and started to do more things like this and learn that what I have to say offers people perspective, like you said. And I have a group that meets every week. It's Network to Net Worth. We meet on a weekly basis, and it's really nice to see the people come back, and like when I'm not there for a week, they're like, "Wait, what happened? Where's the link? Like, what's going on?" And so right now, my business has transitioned more towards large multifamilies and business buying. I'm partnered with someone. My partner is named Marley Tarbo, and she's an amazing human. And we are working on purchasing different companies like SaaS and home services and construction and things like that, along with larger multifamilies, is where we're angling for. Her background is in just operations and mergers and acquisitions of companies. So it was a easy transition to do that. So we're focusing on that. And then that way we'll go back and invest that money back into more real estate as we do that.
Awesome. I love that. That's a good little arc to everything that you've done. And so I want to hit on a couple of points, a couple of those things. So you mentioned house hacking. That's something I wish I had done. And people, like my sister-in-law is looking to buy a house, so like she's asking me all these questions, like, "Sure, you do real estate. Like, what do you recommend? Should we save for this and that?" And so, house hacking was one of the things that I recommended to her. So, what is house hacking, and why did you do it? What were the advantages of it?
Yeah, so there's different versions of it. Like, you can buy a multifamily and live in one unit and then rent out the others. That's what the version that we did. We don't like people in our space per se, but they do have other versions where you can rent out a bedroom, or you have a suite that's on the side that has a bathroom and a bedroom. I have family that does their entire, like, all the other bedrooms in their house are rented out for 600, 700 a month, and they make quite a bit of money off of that and pays all their bills. And that's pretty amazing. And so you can literally just take your house and chop it up into individual rooms and rent to individual people. There's a lot more interaction that way if you're living in the same space, sharing the same things. So it reminds me of, I would say, college off-campus housing. If anyone has gone to college, it's like, okay, cool, we're all in the same place, we're all friends, but this person's irritating me by doing this, and this person's doing that. So it's really an interesting way to do things. But for us, it was a really good transition. I grew up in a 2-unit house as a kid, and we always had someone upstairs in the rental, and that was just an interesting, easy transition. That's why I got into this. I'm like, why would I pay my own mortgage if I can have someone else pay for 2/3 of it or the whole thing?
Yep. And then you move out. Now you got something, like you said, it's cash flowing nicely, and you've lived in the house, so you know what condition it was in for at least for a little while,
Right.
and you know a lot about the house, which is helpful rather than just buying something that you've never been in before. Right? You do the inspections, but you don't know all the little nuances that you're getting into. So another
Yeah.
little advantage.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So then you said you house hacked and you were wholesaling before. So then you went from wholesaling to switching to buy and holds. What did that transition look like? Why the transition?
Well, it was initially going to be just buying multifamilies. Buy and hold was where we started. But I think a lot of people get sucked into the rabbit hole of like, oh, I'm going to do some acquisitions and then I'm going to build a business on this and get the best deal. But then I can't afford that deal because I didn't really focus on what I really need, which is money. And then you kind of lose the train of like, what am I actually doing? And so my old partner and I, Seth Terramain, him and I are good friends up here in Vermont. And we partnered up for a while, and we were like, we're gonna just buy multifamilies. We had two nice multifamilies under contract here in Vermont, and then just learned all of the nuances and the things that were around it. We're like, well, maybe not. And so we sold those off, and we're like, oh, look, that's 50K right there. That's really cool. And here's another, and here's another. And then we got to a point where we're like, what are we doing? We're doing this transactional thing, and it's not the wealth building process that we wanted to work on. So that's how that transition really happened. I mean, it was initially always to buy and hold.
Yeah, and it's funny how that happened because I did the same thing. I wholesaled for a while, and it was like you see all the pictures of the checks, and you hear somebody here, and you're like, "Oh, it's 50K, like that's great," but we need to move on to something else. It's like, okay, like that's great, but like, why are we doing this? And like you said, it's that long term generational thing that you start realizing, and for whatever reason, the wholesaling is like the entry level job that everybody thinks they need to have in real estate before they can get promoted or graduate to the next level of buy and holding. But it's just two different businesses, and that's part of the
Yes.
problem. Like you said, you're focused on the acquisition side, and even while you're working through, all right, we have it under contract, we're ready to buy it, there's then another component that you haven't been working on, which is how are we funding this, or who are we partnering with, and like we can get rid of that, but then we're right back to, all right, we either need to acquire more or we need to start getting money to be able to buy stuff for ourselves and partner with people that way. So it's like they're just two different businesses, and you can't really do both at the same time. It's like you need to build your acquisitions or build your wholesaling, and one of those two needs to go. And if you try to do both, it's going to be a challenge.
100%. Yeah, completely agree. It's amazing how you don't realize, like, I think a lot of people don't realize that it's a business, right? Like, you don't look at it, if you don't look at it as a business, you're not going to succeed because you're looking at it as, oh, this is just something I'm doing. This is my job. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's a business, and if you set it up that way, you're going to succeed if you put the right pieces in play.
Yeah, and having those pieces is part of the challenge, right? You're trying to do all the little work. You don't know what you don't know, so you don't really know who you need to bring on. So I know for me, like when I was wholesaling, I learned a lot through the process, what to do, what not to do. And it sounds like you guys did, right? You had those multifamilies that you thought you were going to buy for yourself. It sounds like you ended up wholesaling it. Like, what did you learn through those processes outside of like, oh, whoops, we should have focused on capital too?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we learned is, the well, I think for us, it's like the aha moment was like the transactional was not for us, right? That was the biggest like learning part, because it's a churn, right? You have to keep doing it. It's not passive. It's not that. In terms of learning like skills and things, I mean, the amount of times I've been on the phone with people and just being able to just pick up a conversation, terminology, I think that's a big one that you learn through that. And it's funny because you look at businesses that are a tech company, for instance, right? And you have salespeople, but the head of that company doesn't really do the sales. They don't do the software. They don't do all those pieces. They understand the concepts, and or they don't even understand the concept. They just know that they got to make this many sales, and this is the product that they have, and this is where they're going. Um, so it's an interesting juxtaposition that a lot of people are in when they don't realize that it's a business, and you have to think of it that way.
Yeah. I always thought, when you own your own business, you're the guy doing all the work. You're doing everything from bottom to top. And that's just always how it is. And yeah, it's great. You can do whatever you want when you want because you own the business, but then you get stuck in doing all of those things that end up just taking up rather than 8 hours, right? From 9 to 5, it's 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. because you're doing everything. And that's been my biggest mindset shift on like, okay, these people who are owners of the company, if they're doing it right and they don't want to be working themselves to death, they're pulling in the right people and putting them in the right spots.
Yes, absolutely. And
And
for you, have you done that so far? What's that look like for you?
yeah, for me, so I mean, I have an operations manager. It sounds like you have one too, or at least is your partner who's running
Mhm.
that side of it and working
Yep.
in her, zone of genius. Whereas I brought in somebody kind of the same way. He's doing a lot of the back end stuff. He's underwriting our properties. He's keeping things organized with who's sending us what and where is it getting sent. And when we get something that we're ready to move on, he's coordinating with property managers and all the stuff, boots on the ground. So it's a lot of that back end stuff where I was doing all of that and then also trying to raise capital, do the podcast, and get the business out there. Now it's way more of ease of mind to be like, I can just focus on these couple of things or this one thing that allows us to grow the business. And he likes to just focus on what he's doing because he's good at it. And it, for whatever reason, that keeping all that organized and all that stuff, like, I'm an organized person, but like to that level is not something that I enjoy doing. So taking away from the things that I needed to be doing. And that's I found it super important. I know you're a big proponent of working in your lane and what your superpower is.
Absolutely. And the transition I've been having in my business is like there were some things that I needed to learn in order to move the dial, right? Like there's times when you have to dive in a little bit to get the nitty gritty done and do the dirty work. And then there's times now I'm like 3 months later, I'm like, oh my gosh, my head was so far underwater that I'm like, where was I? What was I supposed to be doing? Oh, right. Now I have to get back and do all the things I stopped doing when I should have never stopped them. And it's just really interesting to see how you can quickly get sucked right into the business if you're not working on it and you're working in it.
Yeah, exactly. And now you have somebody as well that you're partnered with. Tell me a little bit about what the process was in connecting with her and, building that relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting. So about 4 months ago, I knew that I need someone for operations, and for me, it wasn't a operations person to hire right now. I know where my zone of genius is. It's like it's getting people excited and getting them into the space and making the bigger decisions. And I knew that I needed someone who could complement that, kind of like what you're doing with your operations. But for me, I wanted a relationship that was a little deeper. And so I spent about 2 or 3 weeks just searching throughout all of my communities that I'm part of, diving really deep into like I would search for integrator or CRM or whatever the terminology I wanted to find. And I dove so deep into it that everyone I found, I must have sent out 300-400 like direct messages to people and said, "Hey, this is what I have. This is what I expect you to have, and this is where I'm going.
Mhm.
And if that's something that sounds good to you, let's jump on a call." And I had people who were like, "Oh, I'm interested," like, but I don't really know how to underwrite. I'm like, "Okay, well, come back when you do," and like all these different things. And I'm like, that's not who I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone who's knows what's going on. So she had a post from 2.5 years ago, and it was the only post she was on really. And so I found her because integrator and people who are doing ops, they're just like they're doing their thing. So I found her, sent her a message, and the amount of people I sent messages to that were like, oh no, I'm looking for an operations or an integrator. I'm a visionary. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. If I find someone, I'll let you know. But like,
Yeah.
it was really interesting to go through that process. And I messaged her, and she was on her way out of her W-2, and she decided that, this is what I want and this is where I'm going. And she was not expecting to join up with anyone, but because I was so clear and concise on what I was doing, I wasn't just trying to say, okay, you do all the hard work. I was saying, this is how I can complement you. I think that's what a lot of people, when they're looking for a partner, they're looking for someone to help out. They just go, oh, you do all the dirty work and
Mhm.
I'll just play. Right. Especially us visionary type people. And so that was where I was very clear and concise about what I was looking for. And so the development of that relationship was pretty easy, to be honest. She has her family, and we've got a lot in common in terms of morals and values. And actually, none of those values were compromised when we first started talking, which was really cool, to see how the alignment was so close to each other.
Yeah. So, and going into business, or even just a relationship, like a real relationship with somebody, there's always a hesitation and a concern, like, are we not going to jive? Or maybe it's that we're in that honeymoon phase where we're good for 2 weeks, a month, 2 months maybe, and then something stressful happens in the job or the relationship, and it's like, how are we going to navigate through that? So that's the difficulty of bringing in somebody or partnering with somebody. So you talked about values. How did you guys know that we were right? Like, that, those conversations, I'm sure, happened over time. Like, how did you both? At what point did you both know you were like, yeah, this is good. We match up.
Yeah, I think, um, so Marley's background is in prop tech, so she was in charge of like operations of people, right? What they were doing on the daily, and her background allowed her to get a lot of experience like working with others. So when we went into our first meeting, we kind of hit it off. We jived in a good way. I had two other people that I was also connecting with, and that like made the final interview essentially. And so we connected. We talked, and I said, "Listen, I have my Zoom meeting on Network to Net Worth every Tuesday. Like, you should come." And it was Tuesday that day, and she ended up joining in and was quiet in the background. And she texted me later on. She's like, "Awesome job, you passed the BS test." Because like I was talking of certain values, I was talking certain things, and she was like, "Yep, you passed the that BS test." I was like, "All right, cool. Like, what's next steps, right?" So we kept having more and more interviews with each other, and like when you're doing a partnership, it's and any job really, but like when you're doing a partnership, it's really about making sure you're interviewing each other versus like the business, seeing if you're a good fit, right? Because when we did that, it was just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, yes, this makes sense. This makes sense. All the pieces aligned. And, we put a simple JV together for 90 days. And I think we had a couple more calls. I was like, I want to get really deep into values, into our business values, and to where we're going with the business. And like I said, like our 5 values aligned exactly. Like she said 5 things, and I was like, "Oh, this is weird." And I said this almost the same 5 things, but like one of them was different, but it was still along the same line. So that's when we really knew that we were like, "Okay, this is it," and that was pretty amazing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that, being super clear. Like you said, it's a two-way street here. Like, this is a partnership. This isn't a employer employee thing. This is a partnership, right? Even for me, right? We're not, me and my operation manager are not partners, but it's still like, this isn't a, I'm better than you. Or like you said, you're doing all the dirty work and I'm doing all this high level stuff, and kind of like not as much. So it's
Yeah.
important to have that communication, the two-way street between each other, because that's where things typically end up going south, is if there's a misunderstanding between who's supposed to be doing what.
Yep. Absolutely.
And
And
so you mentioned that she came into your Zoom and your Facebook group, right? The Network to Net Worth group. So what is that group, and why would you recommend somebody joining it?
yeah, so it's we're a community. It started out as a community of connectors, which is still is. So connectors being people who are in the middle of deal transactions. So it might be between money and deals and people, or it might be between just resources and whatever else. And so that community has a bunch of connectors in it that are connected to private capital. They're connected to deal flow. They're connected to just other people who are inside and outside of our communities that really help with finding other unique things. The other part of the group is like the meetings are a lot about kind of like yours is like the well-being, right? It's a lot about experience, like my experience going through things and how that experience led to good or bad, right? Like recently I had a I guess a breakup with a potential JV partner that we were working with that was a, we had a non-circumvent for a while, we had a couple things, and like that's going to be a story that I'm going to tell in my group and give other people opportunities to share and understand like where things could go wrong and where things could go right, but mostly about the mindset behind how, we get in our own way all the time. We purposely put up these roadblocks from our childhood that they're protectors from our childhood that are now getting in the way because they're still protecting you from something that's not really a threat anymore because you're an adult and you can handle that. But you have to get out of your own head and get out of your own way in order to move that forward. And so yeah, that, like you said, communication is really key. And that the deal that went south, or that is we're still in the middle of. I'm not really sure where it's at now. We'll see when this airs. But that deal is like we're in the middle of it. It's a very emotional situation right now, and we're trying to make amends. And it's just, the communication on my part, I was wrong. I made the mistakes of not communicating properly, not being aware of the other person's feelings and what they needed. And it just went the wrong way, and I take ownership for that 100%. I'm definitely sorry for what did happen. Yeah, so just an interesting thing to see how all those things come together and how you can learn from them very, very much, and help others learn as well.
Yeah, and that's important too. And like I said, everybody's different experiences. So if I can learn from a mistake that you made, and even better that you own it, right? That's great. Like not everybody's willing to own their mistake, and you know, all right, I screwed up. How can we move forward from this? But if I can learn from your experience, so I don't have to make that mistake, I would do that all day long. So the more experiences and the more different backgrounds you get from people, the better it's going to be for you and for them and for everybody, right? Because we're all gonna have little different experiences, even if it's something that doesn't happen for a couple years down the road. I can be like, oh, I remember there was something, and then I can go, hey, Shane, remember that one thing we talked about that you happened? Like, how did you navigate that? I feel like that's happening to me right now, and that's helpful. You want to be able to pull somebody up from, who is behind you, and then somebody else is going to pull you forward as well.
Yeah, 100%.
So you mentioned, experiences that you had growing up or that people may have growing up and how that kind of affects them down the road without even realizing it. Right? Everybody has that to some extent. Maybe it's more extreme than others. So what kind of, and you don't even have to go into specifics on like what happened, but what kind of things happened that kind of you've worked through, and how did you kind of work through those that kind of were blocking yourself?
Yeah. I mean, so I tell this to pretty much everyone who wants to hear it, but I go to therapy on a weekly basis, and that's not, we all have stuff we have to deal with, right? And it's not I just go there and bitch, right? I go there and I say, okay, this is the issue that I'm running into. This is the feeling I have in my actual physical body, and it's causing me to react in a certain way. And these are the inputs that are coming in, and the outputs are this. What is the real issue here, and where does that stem from? And so, as a child, we all go through things like, not being heard or understood, or feeling like you're not, like for me, that's my biggest thing, is like being heard and understood, um, and welcomed in a way, right? And my family is great. Like they were great people. They did the best they could, and they still do. They were not capable of understanding my version of what I needed, and I couldn't, as a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old, say what I needed. Never could, And I know growing up, my mom was like, "If you want to go to therapy, I'll let you go. Like we'll set it up." I'm like, "Dad doesn't go to therapy. I'm not going to." It was like it was one of those things. It was not okay, right? And I wish I was able to at that time, but I don't regret any of that, because now I can go back and look and say, okay, that little Shane needed this specific thing. They just needed a hug during this moment to be understood and identified and recognized, and they were vulnerable, and they were not heard, and they were not listened to. And so that moment that I have, like, I go back and I have to give my little Shane a hug and say it's okay, like, because what would I do, because I'm the adult now, and I have to thank that version of me and say, hey, thank you for being a security blanket for me all these years trying to protect me, but this specific response, I don't need this anymore, so thank you, but you step aside. I got this, right? And that's the biggest way that I look at all of that. self-growth. And if you can do that, then it just changes the way who you are and what you do.
100%. And, I think nowadays therapy is something that's definitely way more open and accepted. Maybe not that it wasn't before, but in my eyes growing up, I was kind of the same way. Like, my dad never went, like my mom didn't even go. Not that they were against it, but they didn't. Now my mom goes all the time. She's open with me about that, and she
Yeah.
says, if you ever need to go, you need to go, and like work through your stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. And I definitely struggle with being open and honest with my emotions, and so it's something that I'm working on. I don't go to therapy. I have gone to different times. I've bounced around a different therapist. I think that's, we talk about building a business relationship or even a personal relationship. I think that relationship with you and your therapist is something that needs to work, and you need to bounce around. I don't know if you had, if the first one was the right one, or if it was like, no, I had to try 6 or 7 before I got to who was the right fit.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I've had like 3 or so. And this one, actually, it's funny. My wife started going to this person, and it just resonated with her. And she's like, if you ever want, you can take one of my sessions just to see, because you're dealing with this thing. I was like, sure, let's do it. And I did it. And I was like, okay, I like this guy. The guy made me like in tears the first session. Like, it was insane. And like just got down to the real core of what was there. But I went in there open and vulnerable enough to do that. And part of, we talk about miscommunication in the last thing that happened that I was talking about with this deal. Like, I was not open and vulnerable. I was just trying to get the deal done, and that was my fault, right? So it's definitely an interesting thing to see and reflect on. And you're like, oh, I wish I did some things differently. All I can do now is try to fix it, and if that's not going to work, then I tried, right? And I want to. But it's a really interesting balance, all of that, and to see where your growth can be, because it's all about reflection. If you're not reflecting on yourself, then you're not growing.
Yeah, that's a very common theme that with everybody that I've talked to is, what some of the struggles you went through and how did you get through them? And, everyone was like, when you're in it, it seems so terrible and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And then when you're out of it or somewhere down the road, you look back and you go, wow, I learned so much about something, about myself, and I'm so much better for it. And in the moment, it doesn't feel like it. And sometimes even afterwards, it doesn't feel like it until you talk to somebody else, whether it's your therapist or your spouse or your business partner, and they're like, oh no, but like I see the difference. Like you do this XYZ thing so much better. And so sometimes it takes somebody else seeing it, but the gap in the gain is that exactly, like, so let's compare backwards, not to how far I want to go still.
Yes, I love that. It's there's something that happened in my business. So when I realized that I was not working in my zone of genius, and I said to my partner, I'm like, listen, we've been diving into this like full throttle, and both of us were not in our zone of genius. We're both doing what needed to be done. And we're diving into it, and we're doing all the things, and it didn't feel like we were getting anywhere. I was like, listen, I have to step back from this a little bit and really like go where I'm needed, where I thrive, and what gives me the joy that I, being in front of people and helping people and just teaching and educating. And so her response in a text message was, you sit in your superpower and I'll sit back and support. And for me, that was like, holy shit, like that made me cry right there. Right. I teared up, like, and text her back. I was like, what the hell? Like, but I needed to be ready to accept that. I needed to know that was who I am and where I am in my life. Like, I have a woman who's, run a tech company, a $1.2 billion tech company, and she's partnered with me, a teacher, right? Like, it's like the juxtaposition was like, oh shit, like this is real. And my wife has told me in years past, my parents have, I'm sure, said like, I've got this or whatever, but it didn't hit until I was ready for it. And that's a different conversation with someone and yourself.
100%. And you, like you said, you probably heard that multiple times and from a ton of different people, but sometimes it's just that, like, whatever, 7th time that it takes, or reading that book the 3rd time where it's like, oh, I get it. For whatever reason, that's what it took to click. It wasn't because it was that person. It was just that time and that mindset, right? A lot of this comes with mindset. We've talked about it, me and you, even on this episode and in the past. Like, it's just mindset. And that's the huge piece of any aspect of life, is how can I dial this mindset in, and it's just being ready to receive it. Sometimes it just is the right time.
Absolutely.
And so you talked about zone of genius, right? And yours is, motivating people and helping people and teaching people, how would you recommend somebody who's like, I have no idea what my zone of genius is? How do you get that started for them and have them help them figure out what theirs is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up because you've heard this before, I think, from me, and it's so there's a coach, I guess you can consider him, Simon Sinek, and he has something called Find Your Why, and there's a couple different books he's written. You can read the whole book, or you can go to your friends and take a shortcut. And the way to do that is, and I don't know if you got to do this, Zach, after that event, if you got the chance to do it yet, but you can go to your friends, like your best friends, like your shovel buddy, who's going to go bury a body with you, when you need it. And the person's going to wake up at 3 a.m, start putting their pants on, and walk out the door as soon as they pick up the phone when you call. And you want to call them and take notes, record, whatever you got to do. But you want to call them, you want to ask them this question. There's a link. Maybe we'll add the link to this to Simon's video. It's a quick 2-minute video, but he tells you to ask them why you're friends, and they're gonna sit there and go like, oh, because we're always hanging out. Like I like being around you, Zach. Like it's cool. And you're like, no, like, but why are we friends? Like, why? And they're like, yeah, because like we do things together. And it's like, well, all right, what is it that I do that makes it feel like that makes it that we're friends? And they're gonna kind of be like, I don't know, like you're always there on time. You're always with me when I need you. He's like, okay, that's being a good friend, right? That's the definition of a good friend, right? And so you're just gonna keep doing and play devil's advocate with this. And you're just going to dive deeper and deeper. And it's going to be uncomfortable for both of you because you're just like, you want to give them the answer, or you want to like guide them. And at some point, they're going to answer by saying how you make them feel, because our brains can't really process the why or the what. They can process the how. And so once they get to that point, you're going to, if it's one of your good friends, you're likely going to get goosebumps. You're going to start tearing up, or you're going to get, really tight in the throat. And you're gonna hear them say something back to you that's part of who you are, or what you were missing potentially as a child, or as part of your core experiences, and that's gonna align with what your why is. And it's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna give you some clarity on what that is. And for me, it's giving space to people to feel welcome and understood. And when I'm in that space, I'm at my best, and when I'm not, for instance, this last experience, I am not, and I put up a wall and I block people, and I cause myself to, and it's usually the hardest thing too, which is funny. Your superpower is usually the hardest thing to do because it's so closely tied to your core. But I really recommend doing that, and if you can do that, it changes a lot of how you perceive. But as we mentioned, reflection is really key. So if you don't reflect on it and keep that in front of mind, which I have not been doing because I've been trying to just close this deal and moving things forward, when you do it and you really act in your values, it changes the way you interact with people.
Yeah, I love that. And the people close to you, they don't even realize it either, too. I think they can be honest with you because they're trying to process it and figure it out. And that's super helpful. And like you said, digging into the why, just to like dig deeper, right? That the surface, you don't want the surface answer. You want the like deep answer. And it just might take a little bit of time. And that's, it's something that's uncomfortable. And I think people are afraid to get a little uncomfortable, and like having that conversation, that real conversation that nobody's ever probably had with your friend, is definitely something that's difficult, but it could produce good results in what you found is like, okay, this helped me figure out my zone of genius, and now I can move forward and focus on that because it's going to make me feel better. It's going to make everybody around me better. And that's what you want, is to just have that mindset, be super, super positive.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
we can definitely add that link into the show notes at the end, because you showed us that video at the mastermind a couple months ago, and definitely super, super helpful. So you mentioned earlier you're a teacher and you jumped into real estate. Why the transition? And it sounds like the teacher portion of it definitely helped you in the real estate side of things.
Yeah, the transition, like I said, I grew up with, I grew up in a multifamily house. My parents owned it. We actually, my parents had a 5-unit, and then we had a 2-unit where we grew up. And the 5-unit we actually lost as when I was like 7 or so. So it was like turmoil in my household and lots going on. I didn't really know what was happening until years later. I didn't understand it. But it was a communication issue between my parents. My mom wasn't collecting the rent. My father expected it to be done because that was her job. And like she was just, oh, it's okay. You don't have to pay the rent this month. It's fine. And so back on bills and things like that happened. And so they lost that property, and we also lost a property up in upstate New York. We had like a small trailer on a property that had acreage, and that was a very eye-opening experience for us. And you know, when I was the thing that triggered me to move into real estate full time was I did a wholesale deal, and it took all of 8 hours. And I was like, what just happened? I made 10 grand in 8 hours. I was like, did this really just like, I couldn't believe it. Someone called me and said, hey, do you have a buyer in this area? And it was half hour from my house in Vermont, which is like rare that someone would call about that. Uh, and so I reached out to two different people. One person said, yeah, I've got buyers for that. It was a property management company. And a month and a half later, I had a $10,000 check. And I was like, well, really? Like it's this easy? So I did proof of concept, and I went all in. For me, I couldn't do both. I couldn't keep my W-2 and still commit to this, because I wasn't going to be committed to either if I did that. And so yeah, so that's where I'm at now. That's how I got into this full time.
Awesome. I love it. And so I think, that was a while ago, but the transition from a W-2 to, entrepreneur, you get to pick your hours and do whatever you want. That, at least for me, it's like, that's going to be a challenging transition, being told what to do to being able to do whatever you want and not get like, oh, I'll just sleep in a little bit. I'll take a nap here and there. So what do you recommend, or what did you find worked for you when it comes to making that transition and kind of setting your own time?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's funny because I never thought this would be the lifestyle I could have, right? Like work from home. There's no way. I'm a hands-on person. I want to be like building stuff all the time. I was doing HVAC and electrical plumbing, and welding was my last job as a teacher of that. And so it's hard sometimes, right? Like I've got a 2-year-old, and she just got back from school, so if there's noise, that's what's happening. But the the transition for me was I had to set new patterns. I had to change. Like I couldn't just transition into this thing and just expect it to happen. Like I get up 6 days a week, and I do some version of exercise. There's some days I don't, and I'm like, oh, can't do that tomorrow, right? I can't turn it into a habit. Once is an accident, and twice is a habit. But I added that to my repertoire. I get up at 5 a.m. every morning. I go for a run, even in the dead of winter up here. It's sleet, snow, hail, rain. Like I was running all year long, feet wet coming home, and it was amazing. But who else gets to run at that time? Like and that's how I looked at it. I look at it as, who else gets to do this in this place at this moment in this world? Like it's just such a special thing, no matter what the weather or whatever condition it is. And so setting those habits and time blocking has been unbelievably useful, in really just identifying what needs to get done and when.
Yeah, that's the key, right? Somebody's telling you what to do, and that's what I've been working on, as a time blocking, because now it's like I'm going to tell myself what to do, but I got to do that not in the moment. If I do that in the moment, my bad habits are going to come in, or the reptile brain's going to be like, oh, you can just relax, like you're tired, and just not letting yourself get away with that. So sitting down, whether it's some people sit down on Sunday and time block their whole week, or just the night before, and it doesn't need to be even ridiculously detailed. Maybe that's better for you or for somebody else. I think was it your calendar that was like every 15 minutes? Yeah. So I remember talking through that. Like it can be that detailed where you've got every minute scheduled, or it can be like, hey, from 5 to 6 a.m. I'm going for my run, and then 6 to 7, I'm eating breakfast and getting the kids up and all that stuff. So it's like it can, and then it's just like, all right, 8 to 10 real estate or whatever. So it still takes practice and time, but it's different than just being told what to do, and you get to create that life that you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's like when you have someone else set your schedule, it's so much easier to just go through the motions, right? But when you set your schedule, it's like, oh wait, I have to do this. If I don't do this, the money's not coming in. If I don't do this, like, even if it's not coming in, like there's been dry spells. There's a dry spell right now for me where it's like I don't have any deals in the pipeline. Like we've got deals in the pipeline, but nothing is closed yet. So it's like, okay, like what's happening, right? So in those moments, you're like, okay, should I panic and go back to this other thing and default on what I know. And like for me, like I've tapped into my retirement, I've tapped into credit cards, I've done the things I need to do, and I still have equity in my house that I can tap into before I'm not going to quit. It's just not happening, you know. So my wife is freaking out, but that's understandable. But it's also, we both know that we're on the threshold of what needs to be done and where we're going. Um, and so, yeah, when you have someone set that schedule, you can thrive in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of deals in the pipeline, I'm not going. You mentioned you're looking for larger multifamily and buying businesses. So what is that goal in the next 30, 60 days? Like, what specifically are you looking for?
Yeah, so right now we are in the negotiations for a SaaS company right now, so software as a service. We have one of those right now, and we're actually continuing to look for more of those so they can add them on, as well as we're buying. In terms of goals, I think that's what your question really was. In terms of goals, right now it's about cash flow, right? We want to get ourselves to a spot where we're not worrying about every things, right? So that's how we look at companies and multifamily. The same amount of work goes into a larger multifamily as it does a small one. You're still building the same systems. You're still doing all the same things. Even small houses, right? You're still talking to the same type of amount of contractors. You're still doing but
Mm-hmm.
the return is so much bigger. But also the hurdles are so much bigger, and it's really interesting too, especially for businesses. You still need PMLs. You still need lenders. So for us, it's getting deals under contract and building a pipeline. Right now, we are in the middle of, by the time this launches, probably by the time this airs, we're going to be in the middle of a business buying challenge of sorts, and we're working with people to help find deals, vet deals, do deals with them, partner with them, pay them if they don't want to be a partner, like however we're doing it, but communicate and educate them in what we're doing. And that is something that, as per our last conversation about lack of communication, we are onboarding someone specifically for that, so that we can fix that communication issue, and make sure that we're on top of things, because when you're so in it, you forget all the tertiary things, and we need someone there for tertiary to like take care of those things.
Mm-hmm. So businesses, right? There's tons of businesses. You said SaaS. That's what you're looking for. At least one of them. Why SaaS? How'd you pick it? Like, and then how are you finding people? Like, it's not like an MLS where it's like, hey, here's the house, right? I mean, how many? Maybe there is something like that, but how do you find and source those?
Yeah, there's a kind of a mixture, right? So there is an MLS. There's a brokerage sites for businesses, and the statistic of the businesses that go on there, only 1 in 11 of them will sell, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll just shut them down because they're not able to get rid of them. And so there's that statistic. So we can find quite a few business brokers. We have relationships with different brokers, and then there's just people just like you have that are wholesalers in a sense, right? They're not agents like a broker is. They're more of like, I'm going to go out and find a business locally and one that is cash flowing properly, and see if I can wheel and deal and do creative deals or not creative. Like for us, we've got a range anywhere between 1 and 10 million. Purchase price and revenue is what we're looking at. So purchase price has to be 1 to 10 million. And then the cash flow needs to be at least 500,000 or more. And so for those, we'll do anything creative with those, and anything above 10 million, we have lenders that want to buy in and be equity partners in those deals, because there's a threshold in businesses when you're building a business. 0 to a million is one stage, a million to 10 million or 5 million is another stage, and then it keeps going up and up. And when you try to get to that, past that 10 million threshold, that's where it's like really, really hard to get past that cash flow threshold. And once you hit that, then it's a whole new set of challenges. And then you get past that and you get to 100 million, it's a whole new set. And it's, so by the time you get to 100 million, you need to run it like a corporation. You can't run it as an entrepreneur anymore. And so things are interesting, and how things progress. So pipelines we're building that pipeline essentially with the people we want to work with, and helping them find businesses and do deals and help them fund them as well.
Awesome. I love that. I mean, buying business is definitely something that I'm interested in down the road. It's hard because I see other people doing it. I know the cash flow is there, but it's like, I'm still kind of building my business. I feel like I can't buy somebody else's yet. It's like, I know it's a mindset thing that, we've talked about a little bit, but I like that buying businesses, right? And like you said, a lot of them don't sell. People just shut them down because like nobody's inheriting it and all that stuff. So there's opportunities there. It's just a completely unknown. Like, how many people did you know growing up talk about buying businesses?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and
Um,
it's really interesting because it's not hard to do, like, to grow a business if you are looking at it from the outside in and you're not in the business like you were talking about, right? And it's and the way that, like, there's a lot of one person HVAC companies that I wouldn't want to buy that business because I'd have to bring on new people, train them, and do, like, personally we wouldn't want to deal with that because it might be $100,000 a year that person's getting take home, right? But a business where they've already got a team and they've got 15 employees and they're pulling in 1.2, it's like, okay, let's talk. Like, now we can systematize that a little easier. Or, if it's someone who's running a business and they're a small one pop shop, you might merge them together and do different things that way too. So there's just a lot of options to do that, but you don't know about it until you know about it, right? Same thing with real estate. A lot of people don't understand that they can get into it without any money, and they're like, wait, what? So
yeah, yeah, and kind of like the challenge you talked about. I mean, even partnering with other people and bringing on somebody too is to help with communication and all that will help with. I don't know what I don't know. Like, let's work with somebody if we need to. We have something. Like, I'd rather give some of it away than to get all of nothing and navigating that process. Um, so you've been through a lot of different things. You've gone through a lot of different avenues. Somebody who's looking to get started, whether it is real estate or business buying or just getting into entrepreneurship in general, I guess, what would be your piece of advice, like the first actionable step that they could take to just getting them moving in the right direction?
I would find your operations person. I would have a I would have a very clear understanding of what you bring to the table, what you're going to be doing in the business, and if you're not the operations person, finding someone who is. Um, Especially if you're the CEO type or the visionary type, who is, my partner, she's got a combination of both. Like I said, she wasn't planning to team up with anyone; she was going to go at it her own. Um, but knowing knowing what you bring to the table and what you need and what gaps you need to fill, that is the first thing. That self-reflection is key. But I think the main part of that is finding out, even if you are good at it, find your operations person, right? Doesn't have to be a partner. You can hire them. Just they're gonna, if they know what they're doing operational wise, they're gonna fix all the pieces that you're missing and be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, we should be doing it like this because this just makes sense. Oh, okay, cool, go for it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you've experienced that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had no idea that I should have been doing it that way. Sorry, right? What do you? And then asking them, like, what do you need from me? What do I need to do to support you, instead of it the other way around? Because even though they work for your business, you as a manager or a boss, you are working for them.
Mm-hmm.
They work for the business, you work for your employees. And if you keep that in mind, then you're really going to do some amazing things.
Yeah, I love that, and I 100% agree. And I'm an engineer. I'm very systematic with a lot of my stuff, and I'm very organized. But when I was interviewing and bringing on my operations manager, I brought up a couple of things, and he was like, "Oh no, we could do this. Like, what if we did like A/B testing for different email types?" And I was, for me, it was like, I'm organized, but that is a whole nother level of like operating things. And he was like, "Oh yeah, like let me get my hands on everything, and I'm lazy, so I'll figure out how to make it as quick as possible and easy as possible and keep it so it's like streamlined the process." I was like, you know what, I thought I was going to be a good operations person, but when you bring on somebody who's like that's their thing, it takes it to a whole nother level. And that's not just with operations, that's with anything in general.
Yes, 100%. I love that.
Yeah.
And
So
how did you find yours?
Indeed, I just posted it on job posting site, which I was like, I don't know how many applications I'm going to get. I don't know what kind of response I'm going to get. And I think I had like 150 applications in like 4 or 5 days. And so then you got to go through all of the applications, and there's a learning process with that, like which ones are good, which ones are bad. And then 30 first round interviews, narrow down to 3 second round interviews. And it's a long process, but it's not something that I wanted to rush, and it's not something anybody should rush. I mean, you said you sent out 3, 4, 500 DMs to a bunch of different people and had a bunch of different conversations. You got to scale everything up to get that funnel to pick the right person, because you don't want to rush it and deal with a relationship and that's in 60 days is going to blow up, and you have to start over to some extent.
Right, right. But the learning from that is huge, right?
Yeah, 100%. You're putting yourself out there, and it's new and it's uncomfortable, but it's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? We're not going to jive or whatever, and we're going to go our separate ways. I've learned a lot about myself and how I manage and how I lead. Now I can take that if I'm going to hire somebody else again. I can take that with a little bit more experience. The process might be a little bit better, a little bit easier. I can do better by them and not just fumble my way through it as much.
Yep. I love that. I love that.
Awesome. So where can people find out more about you? Where should they reach out? Your Facebook group as well.
Yeah. So network to net worth, network, the word network space, the number 2 net worth. I'm sure we'll put in the link down there.
Yep.
Here's my all my channels for social media right here at Shane Eddie Evans, and that's YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the things. So yeah, you can find me in those places. Feel free to reach out to me. Sometimes the messages go to the mysterious place where Facebook doesn't really allow me to see them until I look again.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook Messenger has been really weird lately, where half my messages are missing. I don't know if that's happening to you.
So it has, and Nathaniel, other people I know that are like, oh yeah, like I'm just not seeing any of your messages. I was like, what? We've been friends for 3 years.
Yeah,
How is this even possible?
yeah, it's crazy. I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't know what's happening. So they're definitely cracking down on businesses in some way, shape, or form. That's what it seems like. So, yeah, but reach out those spaces. I'm happy to help out, and if you have some deals you want to work on, or you have some opportunities that are cash flowing, I'd love to talk some more.
Perfect. Shane, thank you so much for coming on. It's great. I always love having like a little mindset chat and learning a little bit more about you. I mean, we've had this conversation. We've talked about some of the same stuff, but it's always something new every time we have a conversation. So I really appreciate you jumping on.
Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate you having me. It's been really fun.
Cool. Thank you.